It looks like you'd like a translation of the excerpt you provided. Assuming you want it rendered in English, here is the translation of the passage. He stood motionless under the cold rain that cut through the early morning, hands buried in his coat pockets, watching through the window, a reflection of a life that no longer seemed his. On the other side of the glass, the yellowish light in the room revealed a scene he never imagined witnessing. Muffled laughter, entwined shadows, the timbre of a familiar voice blended with another that should never have been there. How could the house where he built his dreams become a stage for betrayal? The weight of the icy water on his shoulders was light compared to the weight that formed in his chest. Each drop running down his face mingled with the tears that insisted on falling. Why hadn't he noticed before? When did he lose control of his own life? The scene before him seemed like a poorly rehearsed play, and he, the solitary audience, had no right to applaud or boo, only to feel the emptiness. For a moment he thought about pushing the door and interrupting everything, but something kept him rooted to the spot. Perhaps shock, perhaps wounded pride. Later he would understand that in that instant, a silent and burning desire for justice was born within him. Ricardo's story had begun far from there, in a small town where dreams always seemed too small for his ambition. Coming from humble origins, he learned early that he would have to fight harder than others to achieve his goals. He graduated in business administration, and with the diploma still warm in his hands, moved to the capital. There he met Carolina, a design student who charmed him with her smile and intelligence. Together they began to build a life, she with her artistic sensibility, he with an inexhaustible entrepreneurial spirit. The company he founded alongside his best friend, Henrique, arose from an idea in a university bar. They grew together, faced crises, celebrated victories. Success came with sacrifices, sleepless nights, endless meetings, difficult decisions. But he believed it would all be worth it. Because when he came home, he found in his wife's eyes the reason for so much effort. Carolina always supported him, and Henrique, a loyal companion on the journey, seemed like the brother he never had. How naive he was to think it was enough to love and trust. Carolina was the light of his days. When they met, she wore a paint-stained t-shirt, her hair carelessly tied back, studying color patterns in a classroom. He, always running from one place to another, stopped for the first time to look at someone. They talked about nothing and everything at the same time, about dreams of having a house with a porch, about trips they would take around the world, about the feeling of freedom in creating something from nothing. The following years were a succession of happy moments, the simple wedding surrounded by friends, the first trip together, the small apartment they transformed into a home. Carolina had her own aspirations. She wanted to be recognized for her talent, to open a studio, to leave her mark. Whenever he needed her, she was there, with wise advice and a hug that calmed him. Ricardo believed nothing could separate them. Together they were strong, partners, lovers, and friends. That night, however, the entire story they shared seemed to dissolve like wet paper. Henrique entered Ricardo's life at university. Unlike him, he came from a wealthy family, but he didn't have the same determination. Even so, his skills complemented Ricardo's. While Ricardo was strategic and analytical, Henrique was charismatic and knew how to negotiate like no one else. Together, they set up the consulting firm that quickly stood out in the market. Working side by side strengthened a friendship that extended beyond the office. They traveled together, frequented each other's homes, shared advice. Henrique was the best man at Ricardo's wedding, and Carolina treated him like part of the family. There was an implicit balance between them. Where one failed, the other made up for it. That's why the idea of betrayal among people so close seemed absurd. For a long time, Ricardo believed Henrique's loyalty was unshakable and placed blind trust in the friendship. He never imagined that this bond could hide a silent poison, a greed that grew in the shadows. As the years passed, however, small cracks appeared in the walls of trust. Carolina began working on increasingly demanding projects, traveling frequently to present her portfolio to distant clients. Ricardo, immersed in the demands of the company, didn't it notice, or didn't it want to notice, that the distance between them was growing. Dinner conversations became superficial, goodnight kisses automatic. Carolina explained the tiredness as excess work, and he, accustomed to seeing effort as a virtue, accepted it. Henrique, meanwhile, had also changed. Previously always present, he started missing important meetings and replying to messages late. When questioned, he gave vague excuses, saying he was dealing with personal matters. Ricardo, believing everyone had their reasons, didn't insist. But deep down, something bothered him. Perhaps the awkward smiles between the two when they crossed paths in the office, or the prolonged silences when Carolina mentioned Henrique's name. He ignored the first signs, preferring to believe it was paranoia, a result of stress. The following months were marked by an accumulation of small suspicions. Ricardo started noticing that Carolina frequently came home after the usual time with increasingly generic excuses. Her messages were answered late, sometimes with cold phrases that didn't match her usual affection. Henrique, in turn, seemed to always know where she was, casually commenting on places she had visited. When Ricardo mentioned this coincidence, Carolina laughed and said he was going crazy, that Henrique just looked after her as a friend. To dispel the discomfort, he invited Henrique for dinner at his house, hoping the presence of his friend would dispel his suspicions. That night, however, the atmosphere was strangely heavy. Carolina forced herself to show happiness, but avoided Henrique's gaze. He, for his part, spoke naturally as if nothing were wrong. Ricardo, sitting at the table, watched every gesture, every word, every silence. Something definitely didn't fit, but he couldn't understand what it was. The betrayal revealed itself on an ordinary night that turned into a nightmare. Ricardo had decided to surprise Carolina by coming home early. The office was empty, and he missed his wife, wanting a quiet dinner. When he reached the building, he noticed the lights were on and a soft music playing. He smiled, imagining he'd find Carolina relaxing. But as he gently opened the door, he heard laughter. It wasn't the laughter of someone watching a movie. It was intimate, conspiratorial laughter. He walked silently down the corridor and, before entering the living room, looked through the crack. What he saw paralyzed him. Carolina and Enrique were sitting on the sofa, too close. His hands rested on her legs while she caressed his face with a look Ricardo knew well. It was the same look that made him feel loved. His vision blurred. His heart beat so fast it seemed like it would leap from his chest. For a second, the world stopped. He closed his eyes, hoping to wake up from a nightmare. But when he opened them, the image was still there, burned into his retina. Ricardo's body reacted before his mind processed it. He felt his legs lose strength, his hands tremble. Everything inside him screamed to go in and confront them, demand explanations, break something, anything that would ease the pain. But the voice of reason, or perhaps wounded pride, whispered for him to wait. He silently retreated to the front door, left without making a sound, and went down the stairs almost stumbling over his own feet. Outside, the rain fell hard, soaking his face and disguising the tears that now flowed uncontrollably. He wandered aimlessly to the car, his hands shaking as he searched for the keys. Once inside, he didn't start the engine. He sat in the driver's seat, eyes fixed on nothing. His mind replayed the scene like a bad movie loop. Each time he saw them, the cut felt deeper. A mixture of anger, sadness, disbelief, and even shame consumed him. How long had this been happening? Did everyone know except him? He screamed inside, but to the outside world he remained silent, swallowing the pain along with the rain.